Okay. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, everybody, for joining for our Brisbane Building Efficiency Program webinar number 2. I just wanted to start with a few housekeeping notes. Please keep yourself muted until the end. We'll have a Q&A session, and then you can unmute yourself there to ask your questions. If you have any questions during the presentations, please go ahead and type those into the chat box. And as you noted, this webinar is being recorded. The recording and slides will be posted to the city's website shortly after this presentation, within the next few days. So let's go ahead and move forward. Here's our agenda for today. We'll give you a little bit of program introduction and background, talk about who's required to comply, cover a benchmarking overview, and then really spend the bulk of our time on some of the compliance steps, talking through a timeline, some of the custom and standard IDs, entering your energy and water data, and doing some data quality checking. We'll close up by covering some program resources that we have available and have plenty of time for Q&A before we wrap up. Before we move forward, I want to just recognize some of the other members of our team. I'm Adrienne Etherton. I'm the Sustainability Manager for the City of Brisbane. We have Mark Costa from the Energy Coalition, our consultants working with the program. Also with the city, we have Karen Kinzer and Nyla Kusar, our Building Efficiency Program Fellow, and Jake Anderson with the Energy Coalition helping out today. Wanted to do a quick poll just to find out, for those of you on the call, if you've benchmarked a building before, just to give us a sense of how experienced you are with this type of program.
Okay, we'll leave the poll up for a total of 1 minute, and it's almost 30 seconds in, so once we get a good amount of responses, we'll close the poll. Okay, last 10 seconds or so, and then we'll wrap it up. And I'll just, instead of displaying the results, I'll just tell you what the results are, the percentage. Okay, so it's been a minute. I'm going to close it right now. So we basically have 80% of the people on the webinar have benchmarked before, and 20% have not. So that's a good barometer of how detailed we can get. So with that, I'll close out the poll and move on.
Great. Thanks, Mark. So just by way of background, wanted to introduce the Building Efficiency Program. This was really born out of the state's AB 802 program, which requires benchmarking across the state for commercial buildings 50,000 square feet or over, and allows for local governments to create our own programs that go farther. The Brisbane Climate Action Plan identified addressing existing buildings as a priority, and we were able to get a grant from the Bay Area Air Quality Management District to create this program, which really aims to reduce our environmental impact from the built environment and targets commercial industrial buildings and larger multifamily buildings, because you can see that commercial and industrial buildings are about 30% of our emissions in Brisbane, that large dark blue slice of the pie there. We also know that these types of programs have a number of secondary goals or co-benefits, whether it's increasing the comfort, safety, and health for building occupants, improving the value of buildings and their resiliency, both by improving the value of the asset as well as making their energy and water costs lower, informing decision makers of opportunities to improve your buildings, both at the owner and tenant level, as well as for our city decision makers to understand how we can support further energy and water efficiency improvements. We're also helping to support the clean energy and decarbonization market and green jobs by bringing this type of program forward, creating demand for energy auditors and equipment providers and the like. And then finally, really supporting that data transparency and market transformation as future tenants and owners of buildings will have information about the places they might want to site their buildings from the transparency requirements. So let's go ahead and move on, Mark. So who needs to comply with Brisbane's ordinance? This is basically covering all commercial, industrial, and multifamily residential buildings, 10,000 square feet or larger. For the details of who's covered, we refer to the state's definition of covered buildings so we can stay consistent with that state law. And we do not include single family residential, multifamily that has less than 5 units, or condos, and that is consistent with that state definition of covered buildings. So those types of buildings are permanently exempt from this program, but we also have some temporary exemptions. So for buildings that either did not have a certificate of occupancy, were vacant, or did not receive energy or water services for half or more of the reporting year, they will not need to submit their energy and water data. They also will only need to do the smaller, lighter level audit called Asset Score Full when we get into our beyond benchmarking compliance requirements a couple of years down the road. Also, buildings that have a demolition permit or are reasonably able to document a schedule for demolition are exempt from the benchmarking requirement. And for the beyond benchmarking requirements, which will kick in a couple of years, we have some additional provisions. Let's go ahead to the next slide. So as far as the compliance schedule, most of you are probably here because you've been receiving our messages about the required compliance by May 15th, 2021. This begins the annual benchmarking compliance requirements. We actually began with city buildings last year and also ran a early compliance pilot last year to help us get started and inform some of the resources that we're providing. After this, I mentioned we have beyond benchmarking requirements, which will begin in 2023 for commercial buildings and then 2024 for industrial and residential buildings. And we'll have much more information about those requirements next year and beyond. And you can find a little bit on our website at this point. So Mark, let's go ahead. And I think we're passing it to Mark to talk about benchmarking.
Okay, great. And yes, the slides will be available in the recording as well. So, and then the recording from the first session is also available. This one's a little different because we're going to get more detailed into what goes into benchmarking. So definitely chat your questions as they come. But so benchmarking, everybody's has benchmarked a building before, the majority of people, but it's really the first step in understanding your energy usage as a building owner, or as any of your role related to buildings, whether you're a property manager or leasing agent or tenant or whatever it might be. So it's, the analogy is, step on the scale. So get your building sized up and see what's going on with it. And so you can think about, once you do benchmark your building, you get a lot of information about how the building operates. It's really important to understand, what do you do with those numbers? So it's very helpful to compare that benchmarking score, which is typically how much energy or water do you use per square foot of your building. And so you can compare that number year over year. So how did your building do last year compared to this year, and so on and so forth. You can also use it to compare it against other similar building types, which is really important. And it's really practical that you're comparing your building to a similar building. You can imagine a hospital that's up and running 24 hours a day might be very different than, say, a city example of a community recreation center, which has different operating hours. So Comparing it to peers is important. And then you can also compare it against scenarios. And those scenarios might be things like before and after COVID, or it might be things like before and after you do a retrofit or do something to your building. Or as an owner, maybe if you have a new tenant, you can reset a baseline. So it's really important to understand how and when to use those comparisons. So the whole workflow of the benchmarking information for the ordinance is that there's reporting, which building owners will, as we'll learn today, benchmark your building and make some informed decisions. That information goes to, in this case, the city of Brisbane, so that they can understand the energy usage in the city and really engage in a dialogue and try and do planning and perhaps a degree of advocacy to those that administer energy related programs. So there's quite a few. So we wanted to really make a connection between the data that's coming in and the insights of that data and how that can help give back to building owners and everybody that has a building or works in a building or lives in a building in Brisbane. So that's really important that we connect the dots there. And so that's part of that last bubble is how do we do this in a way that compares the performance and rewards people for meeting local goals, which ultimately roll up into our long-term state energy goals. So with that, we'll talk a little bit about compliance. Let me talk this. So some of the steps that go in this are outlined here. And so here's the timeline. So we thought it would be really helpful for people to understand if you have all the information at your fingertips and you've done this before, it could take, 1 day. But if you don't have any of this started, please do not wait until the day before or the day of the compliance deadline. So if you're starting from scratch and you want to automate your energy data going into Portfolio Manager, at the very best case, it could take 12 days at the soonest. So for those of you that have benchmarked a building, hopefully you can confirm this. If you've seen otherwise, let us know. But we've, Brisbane has benchmarked all their facilities, which go down to 2,000 square feet for the purpose of this ordinance. And we at the Energy Coalition have benchmarked hundreds of buildings. So we can definitely confirm this. So the first thing you want to do is assess your portfolio. Hopefully, most of the buildings are in Brisbane, but if there's others outside of it, it's not a bad idea to just, take advantage of the economies of scale and try and benchmark more, all the buildings that you would like to. But at the minimum, 10,000 square feet or over buildings in Brisbane would be the target. So the next step is to enter those buildings in Portfolio Manager. We'll get into a little bit of detail there. Enter your utility data, and this is really what takes the majority of the time. And the next slide will break that days 2 to 10 through. There's also a little different than the AB 802, the statewide benchmarking program, is a requirement to obtain water data. So that would only take a day, and it's local data here. And then the last couple of things you want to do is review your data to make sure it makes sense. You could possibly have some errors in the data if you do automate that transfer through PG&E, but it's definitely worth it to put the data transfer on autopilot so you don't have to do it every single month. And then the last step is submitting your data, which we'll have a slide on. So just, again, just to underscore the importance of starting early, one, you'll have a better chance of complying on time, and two, as questions come up, you can ask them and we can help resolve them. So going into a little bit more about that day 2 through 10, this is what you can expect. So to start, you would go to the PG&E benchmarking portal, the BMP, and you register there and you basically send them some documentation, and then you wait for them to approve that. And then once you do have that configured, then you would claim your meters that are associated with that building, and you will need documentation to submit to PG&E, and we'll have some templates on that. And that's required by PG&E whether or not you, in every single case, if you own the building and your name is on the meters, you still need to submit a letter of attestation saying that you own the building. And it's a really simple form, but they would require that. Then they validate it, and then you need to go through some next steps to claim your meter, and then connect it to Portfolio Manager. And then, and all these steps along the way take a little bit of time to wait for. So you might start this process and then notice that you have to take a pause and wait for PG&E to take action, and then go back in the portal and complete the next step, and that might take another day. So just be advised that it will take some time. And then the last step is to connect the PG&E portal to your Energy Star Portfolio Manager building or buildings. And that process could take 15 days, but there's some tips that we can share with you that PG&E recommends that we know work in terms of unsharing and resharing your building in Portfolio Manager that will get that automated data. And you'll get 12 months of historic data as well, which is really nice. And then it will be automated on a go forward basis, almost indefinitely, depending on what buttons you click in Portfolio Manager. But that process could take 24 hours instead of 15 days if you take that action to unshare and reshare. So we have some helpful links here. And again, these slides will be on the website. I'm just going to make sure that we admit people in the waiting room and then check the chat before we move on. Okay, so we're good there. And these hyperlinks will be available. So just to give you a snapshot of what resources are available, which we'll talk about at the end, but if you haven't seen it, for those that have not, this is what Portfolio Manager looks like. It's fairly intuitive and pretty simple, and there's a lot of public resources out there for this. Plus, we have some of our own in Brisbane that are very specific to what you need to do, so they're localized. So that's the login screen, and then you add a building, and you find out what your building type is, and there's a list of buildings you can choose from. We're assuming that you know what type of building you have, but in some cases, it might take a little bit of understanding to select your building type. And it really goes down to how is that building currently being used, as opposed to what's the area zoned for. So this really makes a difference when you talk about a warehouse being a commercial building, whereas anything that may be in a warehouse-like building, tilt-up concrete construction, might have an industrial process where that would be an industrial building. So the rest of these you probably know off the top of your head were hopefully about what's the square footage and what year was it built. And there's a couple other metrics that are pretty straightforward to obtain and enter into Portfolio Manager. Once you do that, you would go and enter a couple custom fields. And this is where one of the very few places that the Brisbane ordinance, the BBEP ordinance, diverges a little bit from the statewide AB 802 program. And this is very similar to what most other cities across the US do, is that they require a unique building identifier. That's what UBID stands for. And that's a federally funded initiative to bring some consistency to the way that buildings are identified. It's like a VIN number for buildings. And so to make this easy, we've posted a roster for all the covered buildings in Brisbane, along with their unique building ID. And that's in a Google document format. Plus, it's in an interactive map format. And that's one of the first things that you'll see when you go to the Brisbane website. So that unique building identifier is an alphanumeric number. You can see it in that box under standard IDs. This is something that Portfolio Manager has baked into the selection process, where you can actually say from a drop-down box, add my unique building ID to this building. So that's the process there. There's a couple other custom fields that we thought would be really helpful to have that would also be very easy for building owners to obtain. So there's what we call custom IDs in Portfolio Manager. And believe it or not, they don't require to add the number of floors in the building. And that's really important as we go into the future iterations or the future phases of the ordinance, is to know the number of floors. Really helps with some of your energy modeling and some metrics that you can get about your building. So that's a pretty simple one, 1, 2, or 3. I think the tallest building in Brisbane might be in Sierra Point or somewhere else that might, so it's considered high rise. Your electricity provider, you would have most likely two different options. This would be Peninsula Clean Energy or PG&E. Unless you have opted out of Peninsula Clean Energy, your likely answer is going to be PCE, Peninsula Clean Energy. In very few cases, there are direct access customers, and if you are one of those, you would definitely know. The last thing that we're requesting is your electricity rate. And so if you do have Peninsula Clean Energy, which is, again, the most common thing that we'll see, is you can have one of two rates, either the PCE Eco Plus rate, and that's if you did nothing and just took the standard tariff that is available. If you were more inclined to go for the renewable energy and pay for 100% renewable energy, your answer would be Eco 100, PCE Eco 100. Some things that you would not put if you have Peninsula Clean Energy would be some of those detailed alphanumeric tariffs that the utilities have, like an A- something like A10 or GS or whatever else it might be. That's your PG&E rate, and that is a little bit different. Adrian, if you want to clarify, feel free to jump in. But we do anticipate that there may be cases where you may have a question there, so we wanted to explain it here.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I think this is, going to be one that might be a little confusing for some people, especially if you don't pay a whole lot of attention generally to your utility bills. So do look for a portfolio manager video we will have, and some other resources on our website that will have some bill screenshots to show you where to look for this information. But what you really want to do is pull open your PG&E bill, your electricity bill, and look to see who is your electricity generation provider. All of your bills, regardless of whether you have Peninsula Clean Energy or not, come from PG&E, so that can be very confusing for people. So we really want to ask you to go take a quick look at that bill, confirm that you have your electricity generation from Peninsula Clean Energy, and then if you've opted up for the PCE Eco 100, you'll see a line item for PCE Eco 100 on your bill, and that will be an extra penny per kilowatt hour for green energy. Otherwise, you're going to have that Eco Plus rate. The PG&E e-green tariff is going to be a similar kind of thing where you're going to have had to make that selection to opt in to pay a little bit more to have greener energy. So you will likely know that, but you should be able to find that on your bill.
Okay, great. So we have an example. And so that was a really good explanation. And so, and this example will be in a very short video that we will be releasing soon that walks you through this whole process from A to Z. So it's a little bit more interactive where you can see the mouse moving around and what to click. But just so you know, this is what your energy statement looks like from PG&E. So you do still get your bill from PG&E even if you have Peninsula Clean Energy. And so on the header of that bill, you will see Peninsula Clean Energy. And then in that second highlighted box with the blue arrow pointing to it, in this example, this is the Eco 100 rate. And so those are the two things you need. And that's hopefully as simple and straightforward as this can be. And you set this up one time and you're done. And again, it's really helpful to understand where your energy is coming from and the renewable content of it. So we'll move on from here, but don't, and if you've done this before, please chat us and let us know that, you've had this experience, or you have questions, or you want recommendations on more clarification. And so I'm going to pass it back to Adrian to speak a little bit about water data and how you can get that information into Portfolio Manager.
Great, thanks, Mark. So hopefully for most buildings, this is going to be fairly straightforward accessing your water data. The city of Brisbane bills bi-monthly for water data. So you will have bills from December to February and so on. It's important to know that Portfolio Manager requires that you include all of the dates from January 1st to December 31st of the calendar year that we're reporting on. So for this first reporting period, you're actually going to enter 7 bills. We'll cover all the way from December and will actually be 2019 until February of 2021, so that you include all of those dates in 2020. And so there's a simple portfolio manager template that you can download. You can download it within Portfolio Manager, and we also have a copy of it on our website that you can download from there. We'll show you where that is when we go through the resources a little bit later on in this presentation. But we have those dates already filled in there for you, so you can grab that there and just go look to your bills to add in the usage and the cost. So it should be pretty straightforward, and then simple upload that file document into Portfolio Manager and you should be good to go. Go ahead to the next slide. So for some buildings, if you do not have your water meter in your own name, you may need to get some access to that data if you don't have it directly. So we've created a few template letters on our website that you can use for these purposes. We have one which is a water owner attestation letter, similar to what you would use for PG&E and the energy side. You know, this is basically to claim your building as your own in the purposes of the city, you know, to be able to provide that data to you. The second is a water data release template. And so that's going to be used more in the cases of the tenant needing to give that data to an owner. So I put a few use cases down here as far as how you would use those forms. If you are a building owner and you have a single tenant, you could actually just go ahead and use that second template, the data release template, send that template to your tenant and ask them to release that data to you. If you are a building owner with 2 tenants, you would actually do that step twice, one for each tenant, and then you would also complete that first owner attestation template and submit that whole package to us. Building owners with 3 or more tenants just need to claim that the building is theirs, and we will be able to provide aggregated data to them for all of the clients, you know, rolled up into one line item. And that is enabled by that state legislation that allows us to provide that aggregated data. If for some reason you are an account holder and you don't have your historical data, or you need to have that released to somebody else who is benchmarking on your behalf, you can use that second template. So hopefully that's clear and not too confusing. We'll go through those, can take a look at where those templates are later on. And Mark, I'll go ahead and let you talk about the energy side.
So once you get your water data, you also want your energy data. So this is really helpful. If you automate the capture of your energy data, you won't have to go in every month and type it in, or you won't have to hopefully not on the 14th of May of every year, try and obtain your 12 months of PDF bills or try and find your login to your PG&E account. You can just be rest assured that your energy information is in Portfolio Manager. So this is one of the things that we want to highlight, but it's not the only way to put your data into Portfolio Manager. And what we're talking about here is, as a lot of folks know on this call, every month, you know, we want monthly data. We're not going through the green button process. We're getting 15-minute interval data. This is your natural gas and electricity data for every month. And we're also looking at getting the calendar year data. So just keep in mind, as Adrian said before, your bills might straddle the calendar year. So if that is the case, which is very likely, you know, you want to make sure that you capture your billing period that covers, you know, maybe some of December of the previous year and goes into January. So what we will have a video on, and we have instructions in the slide deck, is the PG&E web services. And that's what we spoke to earlier in the slide deck about the benchmarking portal from PG&E, the BMP. So you would request the data from the utility, you go to the website, and it's a really easy process that it gives you prompts that you some click some buttons. We've gone through this ourselves many times, and hopefully we've boiled it down to the need to know information with some real world examples. And then anytime a curveball may come up, we've provided a template or guidance for that. So like that letter that you might need to send to PG&E that says that you own the building. And then we have some use cases where it's very likely that you have some tenants. So we included that hyperlink on how to send that tenant request to your tenant. And just a big thank you again to those that have participated in the early compliance pilot, because we have gone through that latest process with PG&E to really make sure that the latest version of the PG&E Web Services portal is functioning as reflected in our guidance documents. And then ultimately what you will be very happy about is the utility is syncing the data to your portfolio manager account. We mentioned there's other ways to enter your data. You could go into portfolio manager and type in the values of your natural gas and electricity usage for every month. It's fairly quick. You would just have to have all of your data available to you in front of you in one place, or every month you would do that. There's also a way that you can download your PG&E data if you go into the PG&E website where you pay your bill, and you would download your data. It might be in a 15-minute interval format, and you would have to make it a monthly data format, and then you would need to put it in the portfolio manager template and then upload that template to portfolio manager. Those are a few steps, but again, it's very doable. Once you do it once, it's on autopilot, and it's something that you can very quickly do. And one of the things there is there's no wait time. There's no back and forth waiting for authorization at each of those days 2 through 10 in the PG&E automated portal. But the trade-off there is that the process is not on autopilot, and you do have to verify that every time go through the process. So whatever fits for you is more than fine, as long as the data is there and it's reported.
Mark, can I just clarify real quick? When you do if you do go the green button data download route, there is an option to download monthly data. So that should save you one step, and really the format is pretty similar to the portfolio manager format. Might require a few edits, but is pretty close. But I think it's really important to note that if you do not own all of the meters for your building, if you have tenants who are paying their own utility bills, you will have to go through that PG&E benchmarking portal to be able to get that data, or that final bullet on this screen of contacting PG&E and providing them, asking them to provide that spreadsheet for you for the aggregated data.
Great. Okay. So again, this is a clickable hyperlink. So right inside the slide deck, you can get started. And there's a pretty handy manual that PG&E has. It's a little long, but it's very comprehensive. And we've boiled that down into a few-minute video that will be coming out pretty soon here in the next couple weeks, I'm guessing, but it's going to be very easy. But again, just to give an overview, you go to the PG&E website, you give them some information about your building, you collect the information from your meters or your tenants, and then you connect that to Portfolio Manager, and then you view the results. One thing that we do want to acknowledge is data always requires some analysis, and we've experienced firsthand. And if you've experienced this yourself, or if you do have PG&E Web Services enabled, we highly encourage you to review that data. And there's some tools to do that. One of it is just common sense. Look at it and see if you have some extreme spike in your data, and that might be a result of some data errors on the PG&E side that add 2 billing periods together, and it makes it look like your building has skyrocketed in its consumption data. And again, the goal of the ordinance is to understand your consumption and ideally reduce it so that we can meet our state goals when it comes to energy reduction and most importantly, climate goals such as greenhouse gas reduction. You may have some other errors or gaps in the data. So again, take a look at it, and Portfolio Manager has a data quality checker tool, and you click the button and it runs, and it's actually a requirement for AB 802 for the statewide program. And it's a requirement, I think, in nearly every single benchmarking program across the US and definitely within California. So you click this little button within Portfolio Manager, check for errors, and then it will tell you if you do have errors. And we'll talk about a couple of those in a second and how to fix them, right? We just don't want to tell you there's errors. We want to tell you what to do about them. So we will get to that in the next couple slides. So this is where it's located in the summary tab, in the metric summary. You just click this button. And then also you have the ability to see what time frame that you're checking for those errors. So you can go back and check your historic data. What we're concerned with this for compliance with this round in the BBEP ordinance is the calendar year of 2020. So you would want to say December 31, 2020. And so with that, I would encourage people to chat your question, let us know your feedback, confirm whether or not you're experiencing these errors or not, or if you have questions or concerns, so that we can capture those questions before we wrap up. So with that, I'll turn it back to Adrienne to give some firsthand experience on what they had to do to get their data looking clean and understandable.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. This is, as Mark said, a process to go through, and it can take a little bit of time. It's not impossible. I can say for sure it is doable, but it does take a little bit of patience sometimes to make sure that you have everything correct and to wait for PG&E to make some of the corrections where needed. So the first thing when you are looking at your data quality is just to always be on the lookout for these red exclamation points or these yellow boxes that will pop up with the warnings about errors. And so you can see here an example of a common error that the electric grid meter has an overlap of 31 days. Probably what that means is there's going to be 2 entries for that time period. And so the next slide has a couple of examples of common errors that are actually correctable on your own. So the first 2 sets of data that you see for September here, it have this example of an overlap, but you can see that they're identical. They are both, 60,382.64 kilowatt hours and $10,841.06. So, we just have a duplicate situation here. And what you can do is check the box all the way in the left-hand column, excuse me, and just delete one of those entries. So that kind of problem does come up sometimes. And if you have that, it is very straightforward and easy to correct on your own. You can see in the second example here, however, that those lines of data are definitely very different. And so at first that's a little alarming, oh gosh, this isn't the same. How do I know which one is correct? But one thing that was nice with this particular problem is that it was very easy to also correct this on your own by looking at that right-hand column there and noting the date at which this information was uploaded through the portal by PG&E. And you can see that first entry was actually October 19th, but this is for the period from October 1st to October 31st. So that period was not even complete yet. So therefore we know that this is not good data, and we would go ahead and delete that. You can kind of make the assumption that the other data is correct. I recommend, sanity checking that at least if possible. Does it fit in line with your other data? In this case, we were able to see that October of the prior year was a very similar amount of usage and cost. And so that was some assurance that, yes, that is probably very accurate data and we can move forward with that. So just by deleting those 2 extra lines on this account, we were able to correct those data errors and not need to reach out to PG&E or dive into our billing data and try to see if we could you know, add up those time periods to match the time periods provided and see if we could confirm that data. However, in some cases, your errors are not going to be this straightforward, and you are going to need to reach out to PG&E. Some of those errors might be gaps. Rather than having two entries for the same time period, you might not have any. And so that's a problem that you're probably going to need to reach out to PG&E if you don't have all of that data yourself, if you need that aggregated data. So San Francisco Department of the Environment, which also has a benchmarking program, has a really handy resource on how to correct data errors that we have linked to on our website. And this guidance is really the key part that I would recommend folks use if you find yourself with any of those errors from the PG&E data portal, is really just reaching out to PG&E and asking them to make those corrections directly. So what you would do is you just send an email to that PG&E help desk. Since you're not in San Francisco, please don't copy the Department of the Environment. You can copy the City of Brisbane's program account if you would like, but you just reach out to PG&E's benchmarking at pge.com help desk, provide them your portfolio manager, property ID, your PG&E meter ID if possible, you know, include this information here and ask them to correct your errors. It may take a few days. There might be some back and forth with them. So definitely make sure you leave yourself time to go through this process if needed. But usually they're able to help correct those problems. They may have you delete some historical data, do some unshare, reshare, and then pull in correct data. But just follow their guidance and they should be able to help you. So with that, we wanted to take a quick look at our live website to cover what program resources we have available. And so this is our program homepage, brisbaneca.org/BBEP. And you can see here, you know, little intro, the map that Mark mentioned earlier, where you can find your UBID. So search for your building address there, and that will pull up. I think we're going to look at 50 Park Place, our City Hall building. So that's where you can find your UBID. You can also find it in the link down there in that first bullet point you can see under how to comply. There's just a simple list that is linked there. So just scroll by address and grab your UBID from there if needed. And then, you know, we have the all-important reporting URL in the bottom of that how to comply list. So once you have all of your data in and you're ready to go to that reporting step, that's where you would click that link and go ahead and submit the report there. Mark, I want to have you scroll up and let's go to the more detailed how to comply page, because I want to show folks where you can find some of those water templates we mentioned. So this page here, how to comply, is really very step-by-step of going through the whole process with lots of links to external resources. So we've got that link directly to Portfolio Manager to create your account, link to their quick start guide. Keep going down, we've got that information about adding your UBID and the custom IDs. And then here in step 5 is where we have some of those templates for entering your building's energy and water data. So you can see in the energy section, we have that link to the benchmarking portal instructions. We've also provided a template owner attestation letter. That's something that we had to use when we were going through this process ourselves. So we just turned that into a simple template. And then down there under the water section, we have those templates for water that I mentioned, as well as that single water meter data upload and a little guide that we created there on how to add your water data. Under step 6, the data quality checker, again, I mentioned that helpful resource from San Francisco. Only a few of the steps are actually relevant to us, so just be sure to focus on those parts that are not particular to San Francisco. And then again, we have that reporting URL. And then the last step, optional step, but strongly recommended by the EPA, and definitely helpful for us if we need to help troubleshoot, is to share your building with us through Portfolio Manager, and there's some instructions there for that. Do note down at the bottom of the page, we have some tips and tricks documents and a very comprehensive FAQ document that can provide some additional help. And then I also want to highlight, Mark, if you'll scroll up and go to our trainings and case study page. This is where our recording from today will be located. We also have the slides and recording from our first webinar. The Energy Star Portfolio Manager training link has a lot of folks, a lot of other helpful resources put out by the EPA. And then we're going to have 2 additional videos that will be posted on this page within the next couple of weeks at most, I think. And so those are going to be one how-to video on Portfolio Manager, and then another that's that very detailed step-by-step of using that PG&E benchmarking portal. We also have a case study on Byright, who was one of our participants in our early compliance pilot last year, so you can read their story. And lastly, if you have help, if you still need help, definitely reach out to us. We have some dedicated time set aside that you can sign up for a 30-minute slot directly, or if that time doesn't work for you, definitely reach out to us. Our contact information should be, I believe, on the right-hand side of the top of this page and the whole this whole section of the city's website. So I don't want to spend a whole lot more time on the website. Just to note that on the left there, you can see there are several more resources pages. The commercial and industrial resources page has a number of great resources for when you're ready to move beyond benchmarking to taking action to improve your efficiency. And one that is really great to highlight, actually at the very top of this page, is the San Mateo County Energy Watch program. And this program is actually a program, it's funded by PG&E, and it's a countywide program that can actually help with benchmarking for small and medium-sized businesses. So if you are a small or medium business that wants help going through this benchmarking process, definitely reach out to the San Mateo County Energy Watch team, and they can help you at no cost go through this process.
And Adrian, just to address a question in the comment box, somebody was asking, if you do the optional step of sharing your building with Portfolio Manager, you kind of send that friend request in Portfolio Manager, you still need to submit through the reporting link, through the URL.
And the answer is yes. The reporting link is the required step for compliance. That is what we will be using to verify compliance. The sharing of the building is an extra level of data insight for us that we really appreciate, and also, as I mentioned, can really help us troubleshoot if you are having any data errors that you're struggling to work through or have questions about your building. We can help you with that more easily if you share your building with us in that way, but definitely submitting that reporting link is the required step for compliance. We have had a couple of folks who have complied already who have asked about, how will I know if I have complied? And so the requirement to submit that report is by May 15th, and you will get a confirmation from Portfolio Manager that your report was submitted. It will take us a little bit of time to go through and confirm that all of the necessary fields were completed and all of that. And then once we have done that, we will be following up to confirm that you are compliant, or if there are any corrections or omissions that we would like you to address, we would be doing that by the email that was submitted with the report.
And as a time check, we have about 7 minutes left, but One other thing to note, and we can go back to the slides, is some of these utility programs, whether they be BayREN or PG&E, these whole building programs, the requirement to participate in those is to essentially benchmark your building, have 12 months of historic data about your building, and then measure it for either 12 or 36 months afterwards, depending on what you do. And so we were very mindful in terms of the resources that we put together and the requirements for the level of detail, to not make it too onerous, but to make it so that if you do comply with the ordinance, you're very well set up to go pursue incentives or financing or whatever you might need to help make a better building. So we'll point that out. I can go back to the slides, and this is it. We do have supplemental slides, but I'm going to check the questions to see if there's any, and we can park it here for questions, and otherwise we can wrap up in a few minutes. Adrian, is there anything else that you would want to say? Any common questions that you had going through benchmarking, or questions that you've heard from building owners?
I think we've touched on a lot of those common questions as we put together this presentation. I think one thing that is, come up a couple of times is kind of the question of who is the right person to submit the report. The requirement is for building owners, but we do have some buildings where it might be a single tenant who is leasing a building from a property owner. And we do have some provisions in the ordinance that allow for the tenant to be the one responsible for complying if the two parties agree. So we may have some situations like that. I know it's not always totally straightforward who should be the person submitting that report, but hopefully the owner and tenant can work together. And we do have some ordinance language that really tries to encourage those two parties to work together, and hopefully in the future come to a green lease agreement so that they can also make the building improvements and share both the costs and the benefits of those improvements.
Okay, great. So I'm going to go back into presentation mode, and as we close out the webinar, we will have all this great contact information up. The website for the ordinance, pretty simple, nice, logical extension for how to get there, brisbaneca.org/BBEP. And then here's the email address, and then the phone number, and then your office hours, Adrian. It's an automated availability, right? So it's the Calendly, and you can easily schedule a meeting, and the invite sends out. It's pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I would just mention that Nyla is going to be the prime contact if you do reach out to those email and phone, or set up that Calendly link. She's just added the link in the chat box if anybody wants to go ahead and jump in and sign up with her directly. And she may have some questions that she has heard thus far. Nyla, do you have any common questions you've gotten so far that you would want to address before we go?
No, I think you covered everything. Thank you.
All right, we're just about at time. So Adrian, you want to close us out?
Sure, yeah, I just want to say thanks to everybody for joining today, and do check out the resources available. We'll have a follow-up email going out after the fact to share some of these links and keep you updated when we post those final video links. And we hope to hear from you with any questions or how we can be helpful to helping you get that compliance report in by May 15th. Thanks again.
Great. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.